Welcome to Mental Health, It's a Trap. We're your hosts, Susan and Stephen, mother and son, unravel the complexities of the mental health traps people fall in. Join us on this podcast journey as we demystify the mental health labyrinth, explore common issues, and provide you with tools to navigate this sometimes extremely daunting terrain. You can expect engaging conversations, personal stories, and probably also have a laugh or two. Access to mental health care should not be what causes you additional stress. We invite you to follow along, and together we can embrace the darkness together.
Hello and welcome back. We have another awesome guest with us today, a former coworker of my mother, a therapist who does a whole bunch of things. So as we always do, Kevin, welcome.
Hello, welcome.
And would you please kind of briefly introduce yourself to the audience about who you are and what you do?
Yes, so my name is Kevin. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor here in New Hampshire, and I mostly like to work with people with trauma. I do EMDR and CBT are my main modalities that I use for that. And I also like working with people with psychosis, but since even before I was a therapist, I feel like probably since I was in high school, I've been really interested in people who get into extremist organizations and how that happens and how people can do some of these atrocious things. As a white teenage boy, it started with thinking about World War II and how that all happened. And people were so complicit with that, but it's through time really expanded to so much more and recognizing how common that actually is for people to get into these groups. And some of them aren't even violent, but still have these very like extreme views that people get very, very entrenched in.
Mhm. Yeah, there have been a few people that I've come in contact with who have actually said that they've been in cults and they're no longer in them, but how I feel like it's rare to like we know about them, but I would never have guessed the people that I've met with who who are a part of a cult. So it's pretty interesting that they still exist, which I'm going to say sucks is probably, the least low-hanging fruit to say about people who are stuck in that, but also
Mm,
I feel like a little bit because I have someone who's also queer and their family is in a religion, but the religion is not quite cultish, but cultish. And so it's interesting the dynamics of them trying to want a relationship with their family, but also not because they don't respect boundaries or they don't fully believe in LGBTQIA plus and the dynamics of all of that's just a crap show.
yeah, and their cults are actually really common. There's last number that I saw, I can't remember the exact number, but in New Hampshire alone, over 100 um, belief
Wow.
cults. Because
Wow.
they actually work really small. Usually, it's aren't generally like Jonestown where there's like these massive numbers of people in it. Those we kind of hear more about because of the scale of it, but they're actually much more common in smaller numbers. And I have some people that I work with who were just in their family was in it, had that kind of dynamic, and I let them know I still consider it a cult because of the way that it works. Um, I the easiest way I have found to identify a cult is the bite method, thinking, are they controlling B, your beliefs, I, the information that you have access to and around you, P, your thoughts, and E, your emotions. And focusing on that groups that try to take full control over those things. Belief, information, thoughts, and emotions are generally believed to be cults. A basic definition of a cult.
And would you say it could be similar in terms of even just the different countries and how they're ruled, that they might not be called cults, but would you say it's run under similar practices of how they control the population?
Yes, absolutely everything. And I would say even here in America in a certain way. There's controlled information. We kind of buy into it a little bit ourselves too when we are looking for confirmation bias when we go onto social media and we surround ourselves with that certain information and we are just tuning into certain news stations to be getting that we're allowing this control of the information that we are receiving, which is forming our thoughts and our emotions and beliefs.
I
Right.
know you said you worked with like in the CBT model, and so I think, a lot of people understand that in terms of how it's used both in a clinical setting, but also I know that a lot of coaches will use the framework, whether they call it CBT or they call it something else, but they also talk about thoughts and behaviors and how they interact.
Yeah, and I've recently started telling the people that I work with as I draw out the CBT triangle for them, I make it three-dimensional and I add another layer of our thoughts, behaviors, and our emotions then inform our reality. And that's what creates our reality. We want to recognize that because that is so important. We can oftentimes not think about how much of an impact all of that has, but it really does change how we see the world.
Definitely does. I mean, had worked with an individual who was in a religious cult for the first time, and it was eye-opening and very interesting to see the impact in that person's life and how they viewed the world, right? And their ability to navigate outside of that cult and be able to kind of separate from it. But then it also looks at separation from family because, the family's in it. And so now they're separating from family. They, have to be in a safe location. So there's like so many different parts to navigate for them. And so it was a humbling experience to work with this individual and really support in like kind of that CBT framework of what beliefs do you still hold to be true from the culture you grew up in versus, what's in the societal norms of the larger society.
Yeah, it's when people are in that kind of environment, when they get out of it or when they're in the process of getting out of it, their whole life changes. That is, everything was controlled and they were taught about this whole version of life. And now that is completely changing. That is a very dramatic experience for a person.
Would you say it's similar to kind of situations with like domestic violence and like IPV in terms of like the control, or would that be something that's similar but still separate?
Yes, I believe that there's definitely really big commonality there. Those are very similar experiences. There is a separateness there that gotta think about how I would speak to that, be able to like really clearly define that because it is pretty. I feel like there's some gray area there, but they are so overlapping in how they work because it is again the abuser is trying to control the whole situation and that whole person. I think it just kind of works on more of a smaller scale. Instead of a group of people, it's generally just one person, maybe some children and animals as well. I'm currently doing research on abuse and learned. I read an article that said the populations often experiencing abuse are women, children, and animals. And those three populations have historically been legally identified as property. I think there's like that's kind of part of that difference there with domestic abuse versus cults, where it's not that so much that view of property, and it's more of a view of control.
Mm. Yeah, and I agree that it's on a like a smaller scale when you're talking about IPV or DV and it being generally like within a partner relationship or could even be between two family members. It could be, what I mean, but though generally the numbers are smaller, though I agree with that, the overlapping and some similarities, though different too as well.
Yeah, it's tough because it's just like there's nuance to it. What I would say.
One of Stephen's favorite words, nuance.
And no, I haven't said it in a while because aware of saying it now that I'm when people when people go like or and I try not to do that as well. I did a podcast on Open to Hope, and I told a good friend of mine who's the host, I was like, I said like a lot. She's like, no, you were fine, like blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, like I listened to it and like every like 5 words. I'm like, no, it's not like
Well, and how much do people use the word like? And like and like and like.
Mm.
And, I think it's just not being in tune to our language when we're using it. And I agree, there's certain words that when I hear them and try to be mindful of when I use them too, the word like, I'm so in tune to it that when I hear it often speaking with someone, it kind of drives my brain a little crazy.
I used to be part of Toastmasters, which is like a public speaking group that trains you to be able to speak in public. I really enjoyed my time there. But one of the things they do is they count the amount of times people say or like or and they tell you at the end of your speech how many times you had said it to try to train you to stop doing it so much or at all.
It's a challenge because it's part of what most people do.
Yeah.
And when they're communicating or doing public speaking or, even podcasts, I tend to hear that and I go, right? So did you have a question, Stephen?
no, I was just gonna say it's almost, I mean, even when you think about, the CBT model and adding in reality of what we're used to, like that's a behavior in a sense, like having this or a habit, and you can't change it unless you're aware of it. So if you could kind of go into a change model, like you have to bring your awareness to it, because how are you going to change something if you're not aware? And then what are, the tools or the tips to stop using those words, which oftentimes a lot of people will say, slow down or don't say anything. Think and then keep going.
When I had a question and it jumped out of my brain. So this is very informal, Kevin, like I said. And so I was thinking about, cult experience, and when Stephen mentioned the beliefs, right? And so when people grow up in environments, can be any environment, right? And that's what they know to be true. Do you find that the people that you have worked with, has it been very conflictual with, this is what I know to be true, though I'm stepping out into larger society, which is very different from the culture or cult that I grew up in?
Yeah, there's been by the time the people that I've worked with have come to me, they have been out um of their cult. However, there was one person that I learned while working with them, outside of working with them, that they were part of an extremist organization. Yeah, but generally, people when they're working, been working with people, they've had that recognition already. It's while they're within the cult, there's this understanding of, this seems wrong. The truth that's being told here is incorrect. There's something wrong about this. They usually don't fully understand what it is. It's almost like a feeling at first. Uh, and when they come out of that, it is a challenge trying to figure out what is right, but there was already that seed planted within them that they knew their old truth was wrong.
Okay. And then you do the CBT work to kind of work on, managing those beliefs, reframing them and changing them.
Mhm. Yeah, to help them come into congruency with their reality, like with their new reality, what that looks like, and helping them recognize the power they have to define that for themselves. So I very much believe in positive psychology and building a person's positive self-identity so that they have autonomy over creating their own lives. And I talk a lot about developing an internal locus of control, with people being able to feel in control of your life and your surroundings instead of about external locus of control, which is what they're used to, of life and others controlling them. And
And that must,
that is a really difficult concept for people to learn. I feel that is the most important part, the most difficult part for people is identifying how they can be in control because they're so used to not.
right. And then just that the internal chaos or conflict of trying to change what I know versus the new stuff, the
Mm,
new things I've been exposed to in my new reality, and that being like, doing a lot of internal work and trying to navigate that.
mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I know. I sit and I think, right, because when you don't grow up in those environments, sometimes it's hard to understand the impact that it has on people. I mean, as therapists, we
Mm,
can work with people and have an understanding, though, and then just trying to understand the cult in and of itself, like their beliefs and their, which doesn't align with the larger society.
mm.
Yeah, it kind of stumps the brain a little bit.
Yeah, and it's can become so complex. So I feel it's so beneficial to work in simplicity and just starting off with simple foundational blocks in the person's life and helping them recognize they don't need all of the answers because a lot of times cults are having this they generally have a religious theme to them, so religion, spirituality, and god becomes incredibly complex coming out of a cult, and an idea of that, especially a general struggle that I think most people have of there's a loving god, however this pain happens, and it being able to come to that recognition of both can exist. And this is where kind of like DBT can come in to help people recognize that the existence of both painful situations and still a loving being out there, higher power out there within control. And that it takes a certain level of psychospiritual development. Generally, can I go grab a notebook really quick that has the stages of psychospiritual development I have in the other room?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, because that's gonna be easier for me to explain it through that. Um, all right. So our Fowler's stages of psychospiritual development are something that I use with everybody coming out of a cult and helping them understand the um or at least build hope towards, okay, we can work through this and I can gain this new understanding of life and spirituality explained to people as just how we find a meaning in life. So it may not be spirituality, the goal of it for when I'm working with people isn't always to get to a religion and build this relationship with God, but to get a sense of meaning in life and some sort of whatever that means for a person. I, as a therapist, don't push any type of religion or spiritual beliefs on people. But Fowler's stages of psycho-spiritual development, it starts with intuitive, and this is egocentric. It's just us having an understanding of there's us and we have this God that works in our life specifically, or this higher being that works in our life specifically. That's generally ages like 3 to 7 years old of in training, like the appropriate age for somebody to have like that. A child shouldn't really have that much, aren't able to really understand the complexities further than that. Around 6 to 12 years old, though, that's when we start to understand authority. And there's this, like, it's the mystic literal. Um, we start to learn the basics. We start to learn that we can do bad things and we can be punished. That's where a lot of cults stop teaching people and moving them through the stages of psychospiritual development, because at that stage they can be controlled. There's this punishment and there's this recognition of like, you are wrong for these reasons. When I work with people, I start to bring them further through that's stage 2. There's 6 stages. So stage 3 is then synthetic and continual, and it's a sense of identity, and that's from 12 years to up. Like, not everybody in life will go past or needs to go past that, but they need to create this self-identity within this meaning in life, whatever that meaning in life is for them. And for some people, that's enough. For some people, they want to grow a little bit deeper in their spirituality. And that goes into the fourth stage with it, which is individual and reflective. And this is generally where I like to try to bring people to at least this spot if I'm going to be working with them, because this is where they can think contextually about it, these situations, and that's where the nuance comes in, and they can recognize, okay, there's bad things and there's good things, and sometimes I'm going to do bad things, but there's forgiveness, and I can work through that, and I can this brings people out of shame and into guilt. I define shame and guilt as: shame is we believe we are the problem. Guilt is we believe our actions are the problem, and we can account for our actions. We can apologize, we can make up for them and do good actions, and we can make change there and reparations there. And this fourth stage of development helps people recognize that and think contextually and start to apply knowledge to specific areas of life. Moving further into stage 5, it's conjunctive, and that's where there's a paradox is brought into this, and it's much more deeper levels of thinking through spiritual issues and coming up with further ideas of what this means for you in your life and the contradictions that come up with that you have to like mentally work through. And the last stage is universalizing, and this is an altruistic stage. This is coming to like the one with the universe, one with all beings, and just full of love and compassion for all beings. It comes in that final universalizing stage.
Interesting. And what is that called again?
Fowler's stages of psycho-spiritual development, FO.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I think it kind of brings all of it together of what that work can look like for people who have been in cults or are currently in cults and are looking for something different in their life.
Mhm. Yeah. And it kind of gives like a roadmap. It shows people like, we're not going to just go from one spot right to jump to the next. It's a journey. We're going to work through this. You're going to learn the multiple different things. It's like you learn to think of your spirituality in multiple different ways. And it's a progressive approach. So it builds that hopefulness and that sense of direction.
And it's also building a foundation and kind of going through the journey in the process and not, if we're skipping parts of the process, then there will be unresolved things or, that setup of I haven't made any progress. I'm back to where I started. And so I think, in layman terms of just being able to follow the process and know that it will ebb and flow over time and that it's going to be work and some of that work could be hard and you know and it's really where does the client want to be,
Yeah.
right? Some may never want to go to stage 6. They might be good with stage 3 or maybe exploring stage 4, though it's part of the work that each of us has to do in our journeys of whatever we're facing. And so it really helped for you to describe those stages for me. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And working with people who have like either just got out of a cult or when they didn't do any work on this at all. I've noticed that it's been really helpful for them to also recognize like anger usually comes out because they recognize how manipulative the cult was, that they stopped me at the second level where they could abuse me, where they could control me. And like it's more of there's an awareness that comes out when they see these are the stages and here's where you were stopped.
Mm.
Well, I have two questions. The first
Mhm.
one is, are cults generally related to religion and God?
Generally, yes. Most cults are going to have that spiritual basis because that's something that can draw people in. We are looking for it seeks that meaning in life. So people look to this cult leader as they know the answers they can give me this sense of meaning in life. So it's not always God, but it's spirituality is a giant, generally a giant part of cults because it gives that understanding, this knowledge. But there's been some that have been like exercise based. It's anything that can give people this sense of, but again, it's that sense of meaning, that sense of this is how you live life. And there's generally a spiritual context to that, even if God is not really recognized as part of it.
And just to go back a little bit, what does almost that first step look like? Like you said, like if people are going, like looking for that support or finding a therapist or finding someone to help guide them through that process, what's the most kind of like common, I guess, first conversation you have with people? Because I would imagine people who might be listening to this, whether they're in a cult or they just got out of a cult or they've been out of a cult and they haven't gotten support, like what's common for you to hear, so maybe if they hear it, might help them move a little bit more towards getting support if they want that.
Yeah, I said it's a little hard to answer because it kind of depends. I first try to get to an understanding of where the person is at and where they want to be going. For some people, they're just at the stage of pain and they want to be working through their, like they recognize there's that trauma, there's anger in there, frustration, sadness, confusion. The big things that I tell people to do are therapy that can be really important and getting a good therapist that you can talk through these things and process these things with. And the other thing is just healthy social connections. We need a support system and having our friends, our family that we can turn to and just talk with, not necessarily about this experience, but just about anything to build our support systems or how we identify ourselves through. We behave in certain ways, we act in certain ways, and other people respond back to us, giving us feedback about who we are. So having that healthy support system that helps us to identify who we are, and that is, I would say, probably the number one first step, building that self-identity outside of that group.
Yeah, that's one thing we talked about a lot is finding support, even when people feel they don't have it, whether it's their family that they can't lean on or their friends. Like maybe people, like when people are in a spot where they're like, I have no one to talk to, and like there's no one that I trust. And building those relationships give you the ability to connect and feel safe, which, in some sense can allow you to, if you want to share, give you someone to share it with versus holding on to it and kind of like suffering in silence because you feel like you can't tell anyone, or maybe the thoughts of I'm not good enough or I'm not loved enough to be able to have these relationships can kind of prevent them getting that support.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And it can be really tough. And with especially people coming out of these experiences, they are not going to really be able to trust others. They had a really poor experience with other people. So they need to learn how to trust again by remind people that trust isn't a black and white issue. It's not either I don't trust you, you don't know anything, or I trust you, you know everything about me. It comes on the spectrum and we give a little bit of trust out. And we see what people do with that information, and based off how they respect our information, we can give them a little bit more trust, or we can take trust away if they're not respecting our information and our being. So it's that process of learning how to trust again, and we just do it a little bit at a time. What feels comfortable to us, we share a little bit more, um, and to build. And the other person also shares with us too. It's a two-way street. We're not just sharing our stuff, but other people will share pieces of themselves with us too. And that helps us to trust them because they were able to be vulnerable with us too. So that's part of the building the trust process.
That's kind of what I usually use, like the CRS model with
Mm,
a lot of people. And I say to people, so the structure area of that is looking at those. So I'll just draw a rectangle and have spaces throughout the rectangle. I say to them, relationships are all different. You could have a friend that you just like to go out and go to the dance club with. And though you don't really talk about personal stuff, but they're fun to kind of hang out with. And so I think it's about defining those relationships and just starting with hello, right? It doesn't mean you have to be an open book when you first meet someone. It is like you said, that I'm going to give a little, you'll give a little. And then some people, that's all they get is the little. And other people will have, there'll be an ability to trust more based on your experiences with each individual, and setting those parameters within those lines and in the rectangle of, my best friend knows the most about me, so my space is this big, and I just visually draw it on the board so that they can see, and then there's this little space for my coworker who irritates me, though I have to work with them. So it's, again, navigating all of those different relationships and knowing that it's more about the quality of relationships than it is the quantity, right?
Mm.
And I think that's a big piece that can be helpful to people, because it doesn't mean we have to, every person in our life gets to know every single thing about us. Right? I mean, that doesn't even happen in marriages. It just is, right? I don't know that there's any individual on the face of the earth that knows that someone knows every single thing about them. And again, it's that ebb and flow of the trust factors.
Mm. Yeah, I love how you make it like help them visualize it and drawing it out on a board. That's really cool. Visualizing things helps people so much. It really
Right.
so
You know what the CRS is?
I've heard of it before.
I have. Okay.
Yeah, like that I can't quite remember what it is off the top of my head, but I know I've heard of it before, maybe from you.
Oh, maybe. The chaos rigid structure,
Okay, yes.
the foundation of life to me, in my experiences of, chaos happens. There's times when we need to be rigid and times when we don't. And the hope is to get to the foundation, the structured part.
Mhm.
So, and I think the visuals are really helpful, particularly with, I think for most clients and patients that I've used it with, it's been really helpful for that visual piece and the connection, and
Mm.
just seeing the aha moments. Oh, wow, I didn't, again, it's like getting it out of yourself instead of holding it in, right? So it, can translate into, individuals who are in cults, and holding all of that in takes so much more energy and is very harmful. And so how do we support people in moving the stuff where it needs to be, whether it's, you know, recycled and kicked out, whether we reframe it and we can use parts of it. And so I think, yeah, it's really interesting to navigate those things with people. So
Mm.
Well, that's a big thing about, coming up with, or not coming up, but using like bottom up processes like EMDR, and anyone who uses like somatic work and stuff like that. Because I know that there's a big, what's the word? Like more people are getting into like somatic experiencing, which is from Dr. Peter Levine, which is like a trauma expert. And he does a lot of movement-based exercises and watches their bodies based on, kind of like what Kevin mentioned is like guilt and shame. People's bodies can reflect what they're feeling. And so he's like, usually if someone's in guilt, they're going to hunch forward a little bit more. And so he does things that gets them to like open up their chests, and he has them move their arms up and down. And he has like vocal exercises to help, again, move things. And there might be some people be like, stuff's not real. But I mean, he's been doing it forever. And, the people who have been patients or clients, have been able to make progress, because therapists will go to him and say, I'm stuck with this. And then I don't know if it's a full training, because I did a workshop, 2-day workshop, and then he worked with people like on stage in front of people. So imagine, having to go to therapy is one thing, and then going in front of a whole bunch of, I don't know if they might be all therapists, and obviously there's consent for the person to go up and talk to him. And so, but it's just interesting on like seeing it's a very subtle shift, but it happens because he's been doing this forever, but getting the stuff that's stuck in the body to move, because sometimes things just get stuck.
Mm.
And I think that really speaks to thinking outside the box as well. Like, we can have traditional therapy, we can have therapy modalities that we use with people, and also looking at what else is out there. Because I think sometimes we can bring someone so far, and then there's other things that people can do, whether it's somatic breath work. I just worked with an individual who energy releasing, so spirituality, and was really apprehensive about working with me because, did I understand where she was coming from? Would I get it? And things like that. And it was interesting because as the individual shared what it is that they do in terms of releasing energy and love and light and all of that, I was able to make connections kind of with the CBT model. And so it opened up a really great conversation of, they're similar things. They might be done in different ways, though it's moving stuff. It's like getting rid of layers, whether the layer building that we do from experiences that CBT can really help with, like the beliefs, the thoughts, and the emotions and all of that. And so she felt like she could connect with me. And I was like, cool, all right, let's do this, right? And so I don't know, I really like to have alternative options for people. And one of the things that I've learned in doing therapy over the years, and initially earlier on, is the importance of body work, right? And how our body stores trauma. And that's not always helpful to just talk about, because, and Stephen talks a lot about this, it's the objective in our brain kind of work, though not really the body work. And being able to clean out and cleanse our bodies is just as important as our minds, right? And, and even integrative care models where we're just looking at the physical health, or we're just looking at the mental health and not making the connections of how those two really impact an individual as a whole person.
Yeah, nothing lives in a silo. Everything interacts with everything.
Which will bring us to our next speaker next week on the book therapy.
Yes.
Good roll into Julie.
Well, I think that's a big thing, that a lot of things get ignored. And it's like, you go to a doctor, or you get medication, and you see a psychiatrist, or you see your doctor and you get medication from your doctor. Like, there's such a routine of when you need help or when you get help, it's this one way. And, she'll probably never listen to this anyway. My grandmother loves her doctor, and he is the word of God almost. Like, she will do what he says because she's like, no, I trust my doctor. And like, I get that it's great when you can have a provider who you trust. And then what happens when you're rigid in only thinking like, this is the person I go to when I need help, versus like, what if you need a different kind of help and you're not open to it because you're set on like, he has the answers for me. So kind of tying in like what is done in New Hampshire with the functional support system model of having other people, not just therapy, but how do you get people to feel like they have a community? Because even if you have a therapist and you've been going for 30 years, therapy, I don't think is really helping. How do we integrate different practices and things that you might not think of? Like, there's sound bowl that has its own movement because there's frequencies. And even if you look at the science, there are frequencies in our bodies because of how our bodies are constructed. And so why not give things a try to see if it helps?
Agreed.
So I know that we talked a little bit about getting support if someone's either just getting out of a cult, but are there any other words of advice or suggestions that you would give to someone who might be on the fence? Or are there books or other podcasts or resources that you know of that someone could go to?
Yeah. So a book I really enjoy um, for helping people build a healthy understanding of God, if that's their pursuit that they want to take outside of a cult, is called Good Goats. I not remember the author's names, but it's just like a really short picture book, but has this really good walkthrough of who the Bible says God is and how that's a loving and caring God. And it helps people get from that stage two of the fear of punishment to more of the stage three and even stage four of building that self identity and being able to think more contextually and expand their understanding of God a little bit more. So I feel like that book is really good. There's a podcast I like called Leaving Eden, and it's about a woman who does the podcast. She was in a cult um, for a long time and has several years ago got out of that cult, but she grew up in it. She was in it for 20 something years of her life. And then her friend also does this podcast with her, and they do a really good, um, thorough, well researched explanation of how cults work, how to get out of a cult, and just about different cults and groups who are leaders now and what they're doing now, and uh, how to watch out for them and see what's going on, especially with this current rise in Christian white nationalism that's happening in the country. So those would be probably the two main um, things that I would recommend.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to start because I think sometimes when we give too many resources, it's like, where do I start? You gave me 20 things, and how do I do all of that? And I think podcasts are great too because, people can listen to it driving, or if they're just relaxing or cleaning in the home, or if they're just looking for something new to help, with education and
Mm,
growing their knowledge base. Because I think the more that we better understand our situation or even others, it helps us with our own.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely appreciate you taking the time to come on, and we'll definitely have you back because there's obviously lots that you do, and we probably just barely touched the surface on this really big topic. And I think it's probably something not a lot of people hear of because I didn't think that cults would be small. Just in my head, it's like they're usually the big places. And just to be honest, where I live in Eastern Washington, from what I heard, someone was trying to buy land and they're associated, I believe, with being a cult. And there have been a lot of claims. So it was interesting to hear that, or helpful to hear that. It doesn't have to be like big communities, it can be a family or a small group of people.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's very widespread and insidious.
Hmm.
Well,
Well, we appreciate you being here, Kevin. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate you both having me on. Thank you so much. This has been great. I'm
yeah,
really excited to hear your bookends when you have Julie on. She's my favorite person. She's great.
cool. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to either comment on Spotify or on YouTube. And then when we have Kevin back, we'll get some answers. Everyone else, take care.